So, yesterday, students, you didn't have school because it was Martin Luther King Day. I want to talk for just a minute about Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement.
Okay, so when African Americans were freed from slavery in the decade of the 1860s by President Abraham Lincoln, some people thought that they should not have the same rights and privileges as white people in the United States.
Martin Luther King was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1929. That would have made him 92 years old this year if he would have lived. They grew up in a pretty much all-black neighborhood except for one. There was a store across the street, and there was two little white boys, and they played with them all the time when they were growing up, and they were just friends with everybody. When they were a little bit older and they went over to play with the boys from the store, and they came back, ML, Martin, and his little brother, and they were very sad, and they said that the store owner wouldn't let those two little white boys play with them anymore because they were a different color, and they really didn't understand that.
A series of laws known as Jim Crow laws were established throughout the United States, especially in the southern states.
Segregation was seen throughout most of the country, especially in the South. You saw races were forced to be separated.
These Jim Crow laws legalized racial segregation. In other words, these laws enforced separation between African Americans and whites throughout society.
You would see the sign for the white bathroom or the white drinking fountain and the colored drinking fountain or colored bathroom.
In movie theaters, African Americans could not sit on the main floor of a movie theater. They had to sit in the balcony. The main floor of the movie theater was reserved for white people.
That's the area, or that's the time period that Martin Luther King grew up in. That's the America he grew up in.
Other examples would be restaurants, drinking fountains, restrooms, building entrances.
We saw it in schools, especially schools.
Could you imagine not being able to walk through the front doors of Granite Park Junior High because of the color of your skin? That's what it was like back then. There were schools for white kids, and there were schools for African American kids. And of course, those schools were not equal.
They were really sad that they couldn't play with their friends anymore. And he went back and he asked his mom, and his mom says, some people just don't understand that we're all the same. Martin replied to his mom, "Mother dear, one day I'm going to turn this world upside down."
After the Civil War and slavery was abolished, Black people still didn't have the same rights as white people. The civil rights movement, believe it or not, was really not that long ago. It was in the 1950s and 60s. Now, when you think about it, that could be in your parents' lifetime or your grandparents' lifetime. It just wasn't that long ago that Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement happened.
In 1955, in the city of Montgomery, Alabama, an African American seamstress by the name of Rosa Parks got off work and then got on a bus and was asked by a white man for her seat. She refused. As a result of her refusal to give up her seat for a white man, she was arrested.
As Martin Luther King and other civil rights leaders start hearing about Rosa Parks and that situation, they decide to gather a group of people together and start trying to organize a boycott.
African Americans in Montgomery stopped riding the bus.
The African American population, who heavily relied on bus transport, were tired of the policy that African Americans needed to sit in the back of the bus.
Why should this lady give up her seat on the bus to another man just because of his skin color?
So for a little bit over a year, for about 382 days, the African Americans in Montgomery, Alabama did not take the bus.
The person who came in and led the Montgomery bus boycott and became the center of the civil rights movement was Martin Luther King Jr.
And it put him in the front of the civil rights movement. And he continued to fight for civil rights. He held protests and rallies, peaceful protests and rallies. He became head of the civil rights movement when he was 26 years old. 26 years old. A lot of 26-year-old people don't know what they're going to even do with their life. And yet Martin Luther King, he led this wonderful civil rights movement, and the civil rights movement that would change history and change people's lives. He continued to fight for civil rights for people so that they could go to the same schools, so that people could drink out of the same drinking fountains and use the same restrooms.
This goal was equal rights and privileges for African Americans and the end of racism in the United States.
He gave his famous I Have a Dream speech on the top of the Lincoln Memorial stairs, and thousands, hundreds of thousands of people were there to witness that.
And his sister Christina remembered when he did the I Have a Dream speech, she thought, now he's turned this world upside down.
He said a lot of great things.
I have a dream.
What was most impactful for me in my life was a quote that goes, I have a dream that my little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And what that means to me is that it doesn't matter what you look like on the outside for anyone. What really matters is what's on the inside. It's your behavior, it's your attitude, it's how you treat others. And that is what is most important.
There is a picture of Martin Luther King standing behind the President of the United States when Lyndon Johnson, the President, signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This act, this law, new law, was so important because it gave everyone, especially Black people, the right to be integrated into schools with other people, the right for equal employment, that there could no longer be separate but equal laws.
He gave his final speech on April 3rd, 1968. And in that speech, it seems like to me that he actually knows that he is soon going to die.
Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place.
He mentions getting to the promised land like Moses and the children of Israel. However, he says that he may not get there with them.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
And on the next day, April 4th, 1968, at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee, he is shot and killed. The night of Martin Luther King's death, Robert F. Kennedy, who was the little brother of John F. Kennedy and who was running for president at the time, was to give a speech in Indianapolis, Indiana. He was to give this speech in the African American community of Indianapolis. He found out of Martin Luther King's death while he was on the tarmac in his airplane at the Indianapolis airport. His advisors told him not to go into the African American community because they were worried about violence and rioting. He said that he was going to go in anyway and give the speech. He wrote his speech very quickly while he was in the airplane, and they went into the community, and he gave his speech on the back of a flatbed truck. At the beginning of his speech, he announces to the crowd that Martin Luther King Jr. had been shot and killed.
I have some very sad news for all of you, and I think sad news for all of our fellow citizens and people who love peace all over the world. And that is that Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
And then he went on to give one of the most powerful and important speeches of racial unity ever in the United States.
Martin Luther King dedicated his life to love and to justice between fellow human beings. He died in the cause of that effort. In this difficult day, in this difficult time for the United States, it's perhaps well to ask what kind of a nation we are and what direction we want to move in. You can be filled with bitterness and with hatred and a desire for revenge. We can move in that direction as a country, or we can make an effort, as Martin Luther King did, to understand and to comprehend and replace that violence, that stain of bloodshed that has spread across our land with an effort to understand, compassion, and love. What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
The reason that we had school off yesterday was to not only honor Martin Luther King Jr. as a person, but also to honor his legacy and to honor the fight that he was fighting.
He strove for equality for all people. He strove for an America that cared for each other and loved each other and looked to help each other. Martin Luther King had a dream that we could have a school like we do today, where students could sit together and work together and play together with no consideration of race, background, ethnicity, that we could sit in the same classroom, we could learn together, we could exchange ideas and grow as one.
And his legacy continues on today, 50, 60 years later, and it will continue on for the rest of history. We are still fighting fights. We are still working on making our country better. And we are so grateful for people like Martin Luther King and his legacy that propels us forward in doing and saying and acting in the right way.